I thought his point about sustainability meeting current needs without compromising the needs of future generations was about as fine a definition as I've heard. I sort of think of that as the 11th commandment, thou shalt do no harm. He also spoke about the complexity of the process and that the remaining technical problems are more market-based solutions. Adrian talked to us about their growing success and getting to that happy place, which is really what all of the industry is attempting to do, which is, summarizing that, I think, is that all of the value chain in their interdependent activities are gaining from that fairly and equitably. And then from Harumi-san, what I picked up was the challenges of turning the improving performance and durability at the cellular level, or he's working hard to try and convert that into robustness, durability of the cell stack assembly at that level. And then finally, we learned a great deal from Klaus about the different planning programs and governance of various programs developing energy systems, energy delivery systems, including hydrogen logistics, fuel cell technologies, and altogether cleaner energy. So with that opening, I'd like to come back to both Adrian and Jim, as they are both pursuing products in the motive world. They are both faced with the same development challenges of overcoming complexities, achieving customer satisfaction where there's a paradigm shift taking place with the technology, but the customer really doesn't want to have to be part of it. They want to just be able to operate the way they are. Jim, as Toyota looks out at that broad market, what are the things that customers are going to be most concerned about as they're able to walk into a showroom and buy a fuel cell vehicle? And how are you going to satisfy the customer that they're really not going to be a part of that paradigm shift?
Well, I think that customers, are fundamentally, our automotive customers are somewhat creatures of habit. They'll buy 12 vehicles over their lifetime, and they look to, the stage where they're at in their life, whether it's, I want that sports car, or I need that family car, or I need that sports car again. And, as we move, as we kind of move forward, consumers are going to be concerned, are going to want to have their a green focus. It's apparent as we move forward. But what's not clear is how much they're willing to give up for a green focus. That I think is an undetermined element right now. So, as I mentioned in my presentation, there's a behavior issue that we don't fully understand from our customers yet. How far will a customer, change his normal behavior? How far will he break away from being a creature of habit and make a change? What if it means driving 15 minutes or to fill up with hydrogen? What other things, what other changes will we have? And are those concessions that they're willing to make to drive a vehicle that has no emissions? And to be part of the solution on fuel. So we're studying that very carefully, we think that there's going to be this education process that's going to go forward. I think that's kind of the focus of where we're heading. It's going to be a significant effort for all of us, but I think it'll be there.
There's another distinction in the two product offerings. The vehicle, the Toyota vehicle, is really evolving from a clean sheet of paper altogether. But what Plug Power is doing is they are retrofitting an existing piece of equipment. And I'm curious about how long that will continue before, or when do you begin to see the materials handling industry really seriously adopt the fuel cell as a part of that whole clean sheet design?
Okay, well, I guess first of all, I'm not 100% sure that it's inevitable that that'll happen, to a complete extent. I think that one of the reasons we're being successful today is that we're actually following the current model, which is, in the electric lift truck industry today, there is a natural separation of the power source from the vehicle, and they do that for a number of reasons, and it has a lot of advantages. And it's allowed us, obviously, to get in with a handful of products, where about a dozen products today will actually meet the majority of the applications across all the different OEMs vehicles. So that's a pretty manageable level of investment. The market size isn't automotive size, so
right.
I don't know that really the individual OEMs would be willing to make the level of investment to really convert their full product lines over to fuel cells. So I think that actually the idea of a removable power source is actually an enabler to get into the deeper penetration of the market. And the other thing we've seen is that it allows you to separate out the reliability of the power source in the truck itself, so you don't have an issue with the reliability being, or the unreliability being the sum of the two. So that's helpful. And secondly, a lot of our customers want to be able to take this technology and introduce it midlife into the vehicle. And we actually, in the end, expect that the power source will probably outlive the truck, and so you don't actually couple the economics of those two
right.
things. So again, I do think that in select applications, high-value applications, OEMs will come out with trucks where it makes sense. I mean, there are things that are part of our products which are duplicated in the vehicle and control systems and counterbalance. But I think that, again, I think you're talking quite a ways out in time.
Well, Jim also referred to the complexity of the adoption process. How are you finding, or how are you overcoming those complex issues of adoption of this technology and these new vehicles into plants with the operators and the owners of the systems?
Well, again, I think we're fortunate in a couple of ways. One is that the purchase decisions are made by a relatively small number of people for a large number of vehicles. So it's not uncommon that one or two people will make a purchase decision for up to 300 vehicles, and those same individuals may choose to do that at multiple distribution warehouse sites. So the centralized decision-making process is pretty significantly different than the consumer-based decision model. The second is that infrastructure isn't the same kind of barrier as it is in the automotive market, where typically we're going out and converting at least 100 vehicles or so as a starting point. So the customers are going and negotiating good commercial terms for hydrogen from the very beginning, so we don't have that chicken and egg issue. And
right.
and I think the last thing, which is taking it down to the operator level, which is really important, is that we're not trying to replace an internal combustion engine. We're replacing batteries which have inherent issues with them. And so we actually offer a product which, out of the gates, we don't have to apologize for its issues. It's actually a much better product.
Are there any questions from the audience respecting this area of discussion, or any other at this point? Yes, sir, please.
Yeah, I have a question about the hydrogen infrastructure, with respect to the implementation or application of the fuel cell to the market. Quick question about, Klaus, your presentation. You emphasizing on the renewable hydrogen for the CO2 reduction and the good for the carbon footprint to reduce the CO2 emissions. The question about, what is your perspective of the, the cost of the renewable hydrogen, whether or not to be acceptable or affordable for customers?
Well, first of all, I think there's a clear understanding that long term that hydrogen has to come from renewable sources. Otherwise, well to wheels, you will not have the effect that you're looking for. We're looking, and these are some German-specific things, we're looking into, in the transition phase, hydrogen from natural gas also. We're looking into using byproduct hydrogen, and then ultimately renewable energies, basically wind power, and then an electrolyzer to produce the hydrogen. Now, always depending on, sorry, I think I need to put this away. Looking at the portfolio of different pathways, centralized versus decentralized, so it is about capacity and volumes as well. The cost of hydrogen that we see at the station, at the pump, is anywhere between, let's say, €4 a kilogram for more natural gas-based pathways, maybe up to 8 or 9, maybe even €10 per kilogram when it comes to small decentralized renewable energy systems. So it's in that ballpark, and that is, from a cost perspective, very comparable on a miles, on a euro per miles driven basis, very comparable to where gasoline or diesel prices are in Germany today. You have to look into the tax issue. The cost I mentioned is untaxed, whereas, of course, fuel today is taxed.
Good. Any other? Yes, sir. John, hello. How are you?
I shouldn't really make suggestions to Toyota, but I will anyway. As the proud owner of a Prius, I'd like to share with you some of the comments I get from friends, some of whom are engineers, fueled in part by the blogosphere and talk radio. And I think they're barriers to the average person as opposed to the environmentalist buying these clean vehicles. And I don't expect you to provide an answer to these today, but just think about them. The first is that John, that's my first name, John, you have a Toyota Prius, and really you don't save any energy because more energy goes into producing it in the battery and the materials that go into the vehicle than you'll save over a 10 or 15 year period. I don't think that's true, but that's been fueled by the blogosphere. The second of which I get is, oh, you have one of those vehicles, you must be one of those nuts that believe in climate change, and that's a big fraud, you know. I wouldn't buy one of those vehicles because that makes a statement about climate change. And I think you should think about those, because that's the reality of what I hear constantly as to why are you driving a Prius, and I can hear the same comments when the fuel cell vehicle becomes available. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Mike.
So this question is for Jim. You mentioned that right now a consumer would have to choose or determine if the differences between a fuel cell electric vehicle and an ICE are significant or not. My question here is, do you always see that there will be a gap between a fuel cell vehicle and an ICE that'll be viewed by the consumer as it's being inferior, or do you only think that's going to happen with the initial vehicles that go on the market, and as the fuel cell vehicles mature, there won't be a perceived gap?
Well, I've seen some of the reports on the future of just plain internal combustion engines, and the efficiency on those vehicles are going to dramatically rise. Because in the end, I think that there will be a choice of vehicles that consumers will make. The average person may or may not choose to use a fuel cell, even if there's 10 reasons for them to do that. So our focus in going forward, until the market decides, is to offer ICE engines, to offer hybrids, to offer plug-in hybrids, to offer fuel cells. In some markets in Europe, we'll offer diesel as well. And I think that each of those technologies will rise. And then ultimately, it really does depend upon market conditions as to which one will win. I think that's to be determined several years from now.
Can I add to that point? Just not sure if I understood correctly, but being in a position to also, as Jim is, having access to fuel cell vehicles in Berlin, I'm driving quite frequently. I don't perceive a gap between a fuel cell vehicle and an internal combustion engine. Actually, when I drive the fuel cell vehicle, I like it better. And when I haven't driven that for a couple of days and go back to my regular diesel engine, which is a fabulous car, it's not as direct on the gas, it's not as quiet as that, and I really prefer the fuel cell vehicle, to be honest. So I don't think there's a gap today, and I think customers will value that.
I agree with you guys. I don't think there is a big gap, but I think this goes back to the education that you had brought up on your slide. The average consumer perceives a gap, and until there's more experience with the vehicles, I think that that gap will exist in their minds until they have the opportunity to drive one and experience what it's really like. I've driven several at these events and other events, and they're fabulous vehicles.
When I drive mine every day, I just relish the quiet, and quieter than just about any other vehicle I've ever driven on Toyota. But as I mentioned in one of the slides, the questions are just so unusual from people that come out. The perception of the word hydrogen is still an education issue that we really need to address. That's why, as I mentioned, there's not a lot of activity on creating a hydrogen brand yet, but there needs to be more of a focus that takes 5 things that are relevant and important about hydrogen, and those 5 things need to clear up misconceptions about it and move forward, and that'll help the process.
I find it interesting, this discussion about differences in brand. People will buy a Ford or people will buy a BMW, and obviously they're very different vehicles technologically and so on and so forth. The question, though, really goes to relative to this learning about things. Most of the automobile companies do things like Formula One, NASCAR, so on and so forth. When's the first fuel cell NASCAR?
Well, I think that the variable nature of hydrogen and electric motors is that we could go down the straightaway at 200 miles an hour, but I'm not sure that the hydrogen tank would last around the track one time. So yes and no.
I'd like to ask a question to Harumi-san. Of course, you're well aware that PIM and phosphate and carbonate technologies are all achieving various levels of commercial success, and solid oxide continues to be lagging behind. Although we do have 1 or 2 companies in the United States and other Australia and in Europe that are producing very early commercial products. What, in your opinion, are some of the real constraining barriers before the solid oxide systems are really going to be able to take off and achieve the kind of commercial success that PIM is and the others?
Okay. It is true that for SOC, it took a long time to make up the systems. Before making system, we spent a lot of time to build the stacks. Mm-hmm. This is because not only the cell property or material property, but the stack behavior is very, very difficult to be achieved. But after producing a stack level, it is very important to combine with the system requirement. In that sense, recently, many residential micro CHP systems has grown up in this area. So this is because normal size capacity is 1 kilowatt. It is not so big, and it's very small one to be improved by testing or field testing. So in that sense, this makes quite rapid progress in this area. Particularly in Japan, several companies already come to the very commercial level. But still, characteristic feature of the SOC development is we do not have any standard material, any standard design, or standard application area. So this means that we need to cooperate among those different developers. In that sense, in NED project in Japan, we organized one project. Many developers, of course, participate. In addition to that, national people and also university people join to this project. This is because durability or lifetime is very, very important for commercialization. For example, a stationary application, 10 years, 100,000 hours are required. This means that only 0.1 or 0.2% per 1,000 hours. It is very small degradation behavior. And in order to achieve this kind of a small degradation rate, it is not possible for one developer to achieve it. So we need many aspects. So we organize National Institute and also university people to help the developers to realize what is the issues. This is very important. I mean, if something wrong in electrode area, it's very easy to improve. But something happened on the other side of the electrode, it is very hard to know where is the actual reason for the degradation. For that purpose, this kind of cooperation lead to some success to improve. So in that sense, after this kind of cooperation, we can make acceleration of the progress to commercialization. This is my thought right now.
Thank you. Any questions? Yes, sir.
My question is for Jim. As Toyota moves forward with the commercialization of the fuel cell vehicle, what do you see the government, i.e. the politicians' role is going to be in this? Are they going to facilitate this, or do you see them as being somewhat of a hindrance? And I'm kind of speaking about, lobbyists, big oil, things like that. Do you have any concerns about government getting involved to the extent of maybe marginalizing the economics to somehow not give you a level playing field?
Well, government definitely has a role, of course, in the future. Whether, going forward, they're going to influence Toyota and all OEMs, in policy going forward. I think that the Obama administration has provided some direction, in terms of what type of future vehicles that we're going to move toward. They have focused on some battery electric vehicles, have invested heavily in that, and where government money goes, so does the technology, the partnerships, and then consequently some of the technology. I don't know that right now, other than for the support of the direction that the administration has taken, that there are any significant lobbying efforts against fuel cell technology specifically. Recently, I had an opportunity to have dinner with Undersecretary Honan and from the Department of Energy, and there was the discussion was a hearty one about where government should, which technology should government back, and so I don't think that there is everything is cast. As I mentioned before about the customer making the final decision. I think that still plays well with us going forward, especially as government it relates to it.
Thank you.
Maybe a follow-up on the previous question. Yeah, the US DOE doesn't seem to believe in fuel cell vehicles. They're, like you said, more emphasizing battery electric vehicle technology. The famous Stephen Chu 5 Miracles speech. Yeah. It seems to me that the automobile manufacturers are taking fuel cell technology quite seriously despite those kinds of attitudes. But, if you look at how much energy, let's say we want to produce hydrogen by electrolysis in the US and just focusing on light duty vehicles, conventional electrolysis, you're talking about 250 gigawatts of additional electrical production capacity to provide the hydrogen based on conventional electrolysis to drive all of the US light duty vehicle miles in the US. Current average consumption in the US is 475 gigawatts, so it's not a completely outrageous number, 250 additional, and there's plenty of installed capacity that could be taken advantage of, off-peak electricity and so on. And we have about 1,000 gigawatts of installed capacity. But that number, that 250 gigawatts, could be knocked down considerably if you combine those technologies, fuel cell and battery electric. Let's say that you can make a car that has 40 miles range on pure electricity and then range extension with fuel cell technology. You can knock that number down to about 180 with conventional electrolysis providing the hydrogen again, and of course you need about, I think it's about 58 gigawatts additional to provide the recharge capacity for the battery electric part of it. And you can do even better if you use advanced hydrogen production technologies like high temperature electrolysis, for example. So my question is anybody looking at that combination, in other words, a pluggable hybrid fuel cell vehicle?
Well, I think we are looking at those technologies, and we do. I think one of the things you said earlier is really a very big part of the solution, and that is managing off-peak energy. In Toyota City, there's a project where Toyota builds modular homes, and it's one of our businesses in Japan, and we've just built 67 homes in Toyota City where we give a plug-in vehicle with the home, and people live in the homes with the idea that the vehicle itself becomes part of the grid for off peak hours. So all of those homes are contributing back via their vehicle to the grid. I get to your question. I mean, the idea of plug-ins is really important for us, and as I said earlier, we start selling them in the United States soon, in just a matter of months. I don't think that it's beyond the realm of being realistic to say that ICE hybrids are the only type of hybrids that that could be developed. There's things that are being considered, but certainly not issued and ready to go. I mean, again, a lot has to do, as I mentioned before, with feeling through the market and letting the customers decide.
Thank you.
Let me add some texture to the last two comments and questions. Last August, a number of us in this room, myself included, had the opportunity to sit down with Secretary Chu when he visited the University of South Carolina, and it was really a discussion about the fuel cell industry and where we are, where we've come from, where we'd like to go, and perhaps the role of government. But the conversation came around to natural gas and the very close convergence of the natural gas industry and the fuel cell industry, which he recognized was very important. And as you all may or may not know, the recent technical advances in producing natural gas, formerly stranded natural gas from tight formations, has now unleashed a huge wealth of natural gas reserves in the United States, perhaps as much as 100 years based on current consumption. The Secretary was very animated in his conversation about that, and he felt that that was a very significant thing for the fuel cell industry, the stationary fuel cell industry, but also for the motive industry and the backup fuel cell industry, which all use hydrogen. And he went on to say that with that, and with being able to see very the price curve for natural gas for perhaps generations to come is going to be very flat, and gas companies are going to be looking for new markets. He said that he thought perhaps some of the best way for DOE to use their increasingly rationed funds is to develop new techniques for carbon capture and sequestration, because it was very clear to him that natural gas was going to come on as a very significant part of our energy equation in the United States, and may even begin to impact both solar and wind industries as natural gas fueling our economy and our electric grid really picks up. So I was very encouraged by that. I think that was, I share his opinion very much. But so I'm wondering, and also Germany, for example, and across Europe, they're also uncovering these, what were formerly stranded gas and tight formations. Do you think that's going to have an impact on the European energy planning in the future? Perhaps lower cost natural gas, far more than we ever suspected we have, and investment in carbon capture and sequestration to balance, give some environmental balance to the deployment of that energy source.
Well, first of all, natural gas as a feedstock for hydrogen is a viable way forward, since reforming natural gas to hydrogen, using that hydrogen in a fuel cell drivetrain, reduces your CO2 balance by 30% compared to a modern diesel engine. Mm-hmm. So already you're doing some good by taking advantage of natural gas as a source. It doesn't help necessarily when it comes to pure zero emission, of course. And we have a quite specific discussion on CCS in Germany. And I mean, to put it in a nutshell, there's just not the acceptance at this point in time for CCS technology. The federal government some months ago has taken the decision to put the responsibility for deciding on whether or not you want to actually take advantage of CCS to the states. So the states have now the possibility to actually approve projects. And there's only a couple of states that are really interested in that because of their geographic situation or the geology involved. And these states have not taken that decision yet because they're just concerned about the acceptance of that technology. So for now, I would say, and of course this is not an official statement, but I would say that CCS in Germany is not seen as really a major part of a future energy system.
So CCS, you mean carbon capture sequestration?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, sir.
I'm Christian Lorenz from E.ON, a German and European utility, and maybe I can catch up on your question just posed regarding natural gas and maybe electric power and renewable. I think in Europe and especially in Germany, we are realizing that the natural gas grid and the power grid can be combined by using hydrogen. It was already mentioned that by electrolysis with renewable power you can produce hydrogen, and that could be injected into the national gas grid. And this offers a huge capacity of storage. So the national gas grid would be a huge storage capacity for renewable excessive wind power, for example. So I think that would be a very interesting future prospect. But I also wanted to ask you something. You mentioned that it's necessary to bring different industries together. For example, the hydrogen or the classic hydrogen industry and the oil companies to grow the filling station grid for hydrogen filling stations. And I think you are definitely right, but I would like to hear your more detailed ideas maybe of how this could be done, because this hen and egg problem of investing a lot of money before you get any return on your investment, I think will be a very crucial one. So do you have any more detailed ideas how this could be solved?
Well, it is an issue of business model. And certainly if you look at Wall Street earnings as recent as last week, you know, the earnings from petroleum-based products through the major oil companies are certainly something that any sane businessman wouldn't want to mess with. So that's kind of one of the main issue right there. It's not a willingness to address the future now. It's a willingness to address the future at some point in the future. And I think that's what I think that the energy companies are standing by and waiting for. I think that they have the reserves, you know, to get into that business, the hydrogen business, in a big way, in a very quick way, when they choose to do that. I don't have a magic bullet right now. I wish I did. I do think, though, that that there is more to be done as an industry. I think that working within, if we look at all of the OEMs, the Mercedes-Benz, General Motors, and Hyundai, Honda, Toyota, all of the companies that will be producing hydrogen vehicles, we could have a very solid voice together in that regard. So maybe one of the ways forward is to get that voice spoken well.
Joel?
Thanks, Sam. Thanks to all the speakers for your terrific presentations. I wanted to go back, if I could, to that question on the policy. There was a comment on the federal policy and DOE, and I think we know DOE is here, and we know DOE is doing a lot of work. Here's my question. Is it required, is it essential that we get buy-in from other government levels for policy, i.e., state governments, county governments, municipalities? Do we need to do more to get some of these governments at different levels to engage in favorable policy? Or do we rely on a tops-down model with federal governments or national governments in the market forces?
I'll respond to that. I'm familiar with policy adoption in the state of South Carolina, which was purely a state initiative towards hydrogen. Hydrogen is something obviously new and different. It's been a specialty gas, but increasingly it's being viewed upon as an energy carrier and a fuel for fuel cells. Well, in recognition of that, and because of the enthusiasm, support for hydrogen technologies and fuel cells in the state of South Carolina, they've created a one-stop shopping for permitting for a hydrogen installation. It's just that simple. A group of concerned folks in South Carolina, you heard Shannon earlier, her organization, the University of South Carolina, the City of Columbia, the other organizations, they worked together and developed a set of standards, and it was adopted. So that's the kind of state initiative that I think we'll begin to see other states take on as well. It really doesn't need to be a top-down. It can really be a community effort. We have time for a couple more questions. Yes, sir.
Itmo Bong from Kettering University. One of the issues let's discuss when we have conferences is codes and standards. For ease in national and international commerce, I think we should start including it in our own discussion. What do you think about that?
Did you?
Well, I can talk about it from a material handling point of view. I mean, I've been involved with standards development specific to our marketplace going back since, about 2000. So, and I think, we're one of those markets where we actually have well-defined standards in the U.S. for our products, and, we actively are participating on their improvement. We're entering Europe this year. It's not quite as clear, but there's still reasonable and decent avenues to attain product certification for our products in Europe. So I think, on ours, again, we're a captured market, so it's pretty straightforward. I know it's going to be different on the auto side.
What about working with either companies in other countries so that we can have a uniform standard for international commerce because of that reason, so that components made in America can be sent to Europe, or if stocks are made in Europe, we can buy them for a certain rating or range of a car and use that for propulsion here in our vehicles.
Well, I think standards and codes are a big issue for us going forward, and I think that some of our partnerships with key suppliers can assist in that direction. As an example, standards for pumping fuel. There are a handful of global suppliers that can establish those standards and be the kind of the eyes and ears for the industry and for the automotive industry. So I think going forward, we are actively interested, and we're looking for our partners to help guide us along the way.
Thank you.
I think we have time for one more question. All right, I'll close with the last question. Klaus, you and I spoke a little bit earlier about how you've been visiting across the United States. You've been talking to state agencies, and you're very familiar with our federal agencies. And so you come to us from Germany, in which you're very involved with developing government policy and the allocation of funding, even scarcer funding. So just if you could briefly tell us how you would compare and contrast the activities that you're involved with over here with what you've learned from our organizations over here on both the federal and the state and even local levels in pursuing policies that are favorable for the growth of this industry.
Yeah, and that of course is a broad topic, but really what is quite remarkable is that wherever you go, and I went visit the state of New York, I went to California, what we see is we're facing the same challenges, but also we're discussing the same kind of solutions to get us forward. And the solution is not to find the ultimate model to be implemented, but to actually take it step by step. We have existing R&D and demonstration programs all over the world, and we need to continue to have those. At the same time, step by step, we need to ramp up the hydrogen infrastructure as vehicles come along. And I think doing this in partnership is key to really, for the infrastructure side, to understand when are the vehicles coming, and vehicles actually hitting the road, and then, based on that, taking their next decisions. So, what we're discussing is there needs to be a partnership including public organizations. Ultimately, the impacts will be on energy, on climate, all the issues we've discussed. So there's good reasons for us as a society to actually do these things and get that technology into the market. At the same time, from a pure business perspective today, people struggle to take those decisions because short term there's not really the, or there's too much risk involved. So really, when it comes to the question of what could governments do, be it on a state level or on a federal level, we need to look into how can we motivate to produce renewable hydrogen. How can we make sure that fuel in future, and this has to be technology open, and I'm not afraid that hydrogen will play a major role in this, but how can we make sure that fuel includes a share of renewable energy sources in that? And there's different policies, of course, around to do that. Just one example, I mentioned the CO2 regulation that we have in Germany or in Europe, which is for vehicles, because today CO2 comes out of the tailpipe. Well, in future, CO2 is associated with the upstream path, so it's really a well-to-tank thing you need to look at in order to make sure you all the way have a zero-emission pathway. So you need to motivate the OEMs to bring zero-emission vehicles, and at the same time link this with policy to make sure that renewable energy comes into the alternative fuel pathways.
Well, thank you very much. That wraps up this panel discussion. I'd like to ask for a big round of applause for these gentlemen and for the time they've given. Just a quick word. Leo of the Swan and Dolphin has asked me to announce that restaurant reservations for anyone who's interested in making them can be made on a table near the registration desk here. And that reservation table is open between 5 and 7:30 today, and from 10:30 until noon tomorrow. And you're encouraged to make reservations because it's a big place and there are a lot of people here, and you may find that you're not going to get a seat for dinner where you would like to eat. So I encourage you to do that. Well, thank you all very much. It's been a great pleasure to be a part of this opening plenary, and I'm delighted to see all of you all again. If you have any questions, look for someone with a black badge. Our board members will do everything we can to answer your questions, and have a great time while you're here. Thank you.